18th, 2024 meeting of the Union Township Zoning Commission is hereby called to order. If everyone please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of our country. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. McCormick, if you would call roll, please.
Certainly. Mr. Wing.
Here.
Mr. Lewis.
Here.
Mr. Outridge.
Here.
Mr. Shannon.
Yes.
Mr. Campbell.
Here.
All members present.
Thank you. The minutes from our previous meeting, the July 24th, 2024 meeting of the Union Township Zoning Commission were circulated. Do I hear a motion or any action on the minutes?
Make a motion, we accept them.
I'll second it.
I've regularly made and seconded motion that we approve the minutes for the July 24th, 2024 meeting. Any discussion? Mr. McCormick, if you call roll, please.
Mr. Wing.
Yes.
Mr. Lewis.
Yes.
Mr. Outridge.
Yes.
Mr. Shannon.
Yes.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Carries. We have no old business to be reopened before we hear tonight's case. So that will bring us on to new business. Prior to the hearing of the case this evening, I want to provide a brief overview about this entire process. When a case is called, we will hear from the applicant or their representative first. The Commission reserves the right to question the applicant at any time. After the applicant's presentation, we will open the floor to anyone else who wishes to speak in support of the proposal. Then we will open the floor to those wishing to speak against the proposal or ask questions. Those wishing to speak must fill out and provide us with the speaker registration form, which were at the back of the room. Each speaker must identify themselves for the record when they're speaking at the podium. This commission reserves the right to ask questions of persons speaking against the proposal. It is the expectation for speakers and observers to maintain professional decorum at this meeting at all times, and we ask that all speakers be conscious of the time and that speakers be concise and avoid making repetitive statements or arguments. Once those in opposition to the proposal have spoken, the case will be closed for public comment. Discussion at that time is limited to members of the commission, although the commission may ask questions of zoning staff, the applicant, or those in opposition. After discussion, I will call for a motion from the commission. The motion requires a second, after which the motion itself is open for discussion. A vote will be called and action taken on the motion. When a motion receives a majority vote, the commission issues its recommendation to the Union Township Board of Trustees in accordance with the wording of the motion. Our options tonight are to recommend approval of the requested change, approval of the requested change with some modifications, or denial of the requested change. The purpose of the motion is to make a recommendation to the Board of Trustees regarding the case. The authority to grant an applicant's zoning request or to deny an applicant's zoning request rests with the Union Township Board of Trustees, and they will hear this case at their next meeting, which is scheduled for
January 14th.
January 14th, 2025. So that prefatory statement being out of the way, our new business is case number 2-24-Z, which is a requested zone map amendment from R1 and B1 to PD plan development to allow for a proposed expansion to an existing multifamily residential area. The applicant is a Mr. Daniel Lowenstein, site location 909 State Route 125. Two parcels we're looking at. Mr. McCormick, do we have a staff report?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go over the staff report in conjunction with the slides that are prepared here. Case number is referenced was 224Z. Owner of the property is listed here, VA7 Southwind LLC. CO Alliance Tax Advisors. Site location is 909 State Route 125 and an unaddressed parcel on 125. Parcel numbers are referenced here in the slide. Acreage involved between the two parcels is 4.232 acres. The parcels are zoned business along 125, B1, and residential R1 beyond a certain distance. You'll see here off of 125 in a moment. And the applicant's request is for a zone map amendment to rezone the property entirely to planned development to allow an expansion of an existing multifamily residential area, which is known as Renew at this point. This is the vicinity map of the site. The lower dotted line represents the southern township border. The northern portion of the site you see is 125. Immediately to the west is the existing Renew complex, which has, I think, 140 units. That was later on in the report. I'll come back to that. I think it's 144 units total. This property is vacant except for there's a old structure on the western parcel up front that is to be taken down. The properties to the east are mostly vacant, and then you run in after the next couple of properties to some multifamily to the east, then to the south, and you've got R1 residential properties to the north. You've got business along 125 and then another R1 area. And then the adjacent parcel there where Renew is still zoned technically business in the front and R3 towards the rear. This is the oblique aerial. I couldn't fit more than this on there without really losing resolution. So this is the two sites. You can get a little better view of what's there on the property and adjacent properties. And this is the aerial view with the site and topography. This is the overlay as of right now as it exists. So you have here, not quite in the center of the parcel, are two proposed buildings. The very northern portion of the site along 125, there's a proposed detention basin. And staff has made some recommendations regarding if that would stay in that area, in addition to a 3-foot berm, having some landscaping there. The entire southern, kind of roughly 25% of the property is proposed to be retained as kind of like a passive park area. I don't even think that they're planning on much disturbance here unless they have to relocate the detention basin over that way. And maybe sprinkling in some trails on that portion of the site. And that's this part of the site that is closest to that R1 area that you saw earlier on the previous slide. I'll pause here for a second before I get too far into the weeds on the plan. So this project is located within the Ohio Pike Corridor and is subject thus to the Ohio Pike Corridor recommendations. Ohio Pike Corridor is heavily traveled and developed, experiencing delays associated with poor access management. So one of the big things along 125 is to try to limit access onto 125 further. Technically, if these parcels were developed as they are, one could potentially come in on the piece where the detention area is shown. What's proposed in this case is there would be two connections to the existing development, which you can't really see well here, but I was trying to make it so you can see a little bit of both. The northern proposed connection would be right here, where you first come in, that first building on the left, just past that. And as you wind back into the project, there is a passive park area and a dog park, and right past that is the proposed second southern access connection to the site. Everything would access the site on 125, and that is subject to ODOT's review and approval. They're really the ones that are going to have to make the determination as to whether that's an additional amount for 72 units and the traffic that would be involved with that. The fire department did review the plan, did not have any problem with the access or turning ability or anything like that. Their main issue, their main concern based on that plan was the, which you can see a little better on the far left, the plan, and then what the proposed buildings were to look like, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Their main concern in the fire department was where eventually the fire hydrants were gonna be if the project moved forward. So getting back to 125, the Ohio Pike corridor, this corridor has been rejuvenated of late with numerous investment projects resulting in enhanced commercial activity and increased appeal. Among other things, the plan calls for land use efficiencies, access control, aesthetic improvement, and reinvestment as priorities. Also calls for monument-style signage, pedestrian network enhancement where possible, adequate vegetative buffering, landscaping enhancements along the corridor frontage, and the use of plan development as a zoning to achieve desired outcomes within the corridor, which this project addresses a number of those items in terms of the signage, the PD request, the pedestrian network enhancement. I would say pretty well addresses the vegetative buffering, even though there's some things that still need to be done. Access control. Some of the other items are more debatable. In terms of relationship to the Union Township zoning resolution, when referencing the PD requirements, we refer to Article 6, Sections 680 to 687. As far as the itemized checklist, we're looking primarily at Section 684, and then we're also cross-referencing the section for site plan submittal, which is 1131 from Article 11. A little background about the site. I'll go back to that here for a second. So the current Renew project, existing Renew project, is just to the west of the site boundary here. Involves 144 units, 12 units per buildings, 12 buildings. These were built between 1980 and 1991. There was, the first building was built around 1980, and there was kind of a lag between the first and second, and then the last couple buildings look like were built in 91. These are 1 and 2 bedroom units that appear to have been recently remodeled and updated. The 2 parcels involved with this request were purchased in June of 2023. And I already mentioned that the single access point is the existing access point serving the Renew site for the 144 units that are already there, and the 2 connections that are proposed, as I mentioned from that slide there. Further down in staff review and analysis, I noted where the access drives were. The 2 northern access serves 2 existing buildings, 24 units. The southern access is approximately 900 feet from Old Savannah Drive and 125. As I mentioned, next to the dog park, fire pit, gathering space. I already went over the other part underneath that section there. 2 proposed apartment buildings. This was the initial architectural elevations and plan that we had for these. We're proposing 72 dwelling units in 2 buildings, 12 units per floor, 3 floors, 36 units per building, each unit being roughly 732 square feet in size. Overall height of the buildings is proposed to be 42 feet to the peak, which would require relief in other residential zoning districts, such as the R1 or R2. In the case of a PD, it's not necessarily an issue. It's really more a matter of is it acceptable with that area or not. You'll see here in a moment what the existing buildings look like. They are not 42 feet in height, but we'll show you and talk about that here in a minute. In addition to the proposed buildings, parking areas, and drives, the applicant is proposing landscaping improvements along the eastern and western portions of the building areas, as well as a walking path and passive park along the rear of the property, which is approximately 300 feet from the adjoining residential property to the south. The detention pond, as it stands right now in the location I mentioned earlier. In reviewing the zone map application, the current proposal appears to somewhat be consistent with the recommendations of the adopted land use plan, as well as the specific purposes and findings of the overlay zoning regulations. Again, we're utilizing the existing access point for access, provided that they meet whatever ODOT specifies for that access point or allows. Parking and driveway areas appear to be sufficient in terms of zoning and in terms of fire protection. The landscaping buffer plans would ultimately need to be enhanced, adjusted along the road frontage as well as the eastern and western property lines adjacent to proposed building and parking areas. Does appear to be an issue that can be addressed. A sidewalk is required along 125, and although not currently shown, that would be a requirement, and the applicant has replied in staff correspondence that is not a problem, that they are willing to put the sidewalk in along 125. Proposed buildings as planned do not match and are not necessarily complementary to the existing buildings for the renewed apartments development in the nearby area. So one of the staff recommendations relates to that, and I'll come to that in a moment. As such, the staff finds the incorporation and use of traditional building materials as defined in the code would need to occur. So that's one of the staff findings we'll come to. Overall, the proposed amendments to the site would bring investment to the property, an area that's been underutilized, likely in part due to the unusual property configuration. Site is very kind of narrow and very long, deep. So it makes the use of the individual sites tough. You have to really kind of aggregate the parcels and or attach them to something to do much with them, honestly. And I think that's the reason why it's probably been dormant for the length of time that it has. And again, the applicant's using the PD process to achieve desired outcomes. So in terms of action required and referencing sections 680 through 687 of the code, Zoning Commission's role in this process will be to make a recommendation regarding the rezone, and ultimately that, as you mentioned earlier, Mr. Chairman, that'll go to the trustees at the next meeting, which will be January 14th at 6 p.m. in the town hall upstairs. Unless for some reason there would be a delay involving the issue being tabled, which isn't very common, but that would be the only thing that would hold it up. In terms of we'll come to recommended modifications here after I go through the site pictures. So these are the pictures that I took when I went out a week or so ago. This is looking from the existing access point northwest from Old Savannah along 125, basically on your left as you're trying to get out. And this is looking southeast to the right, that same area. That building right behind the sign for Troutman and the chiropractic is the building that's slated to come down. This is directly across from the existing access. And this is looking south towards that proposed shared access Old Savannah. You can see the existing buildings a little bit there, the brick buildings. This is from 125 looking in towards the site. And actually that's the front of that's the neighboring property. The slightly to the right would be the area along 125 is part of the site, and then what's behind that equipment would be the site. This is looking north across from that same area if you turn around, the other commercial area that's across 125. This picture is looking east to southeast towards that proposed northern access connection, which would be, just kind of probably left of, or in that area of the dumpster or left of the dumpster. The existing units are shown there on the right. And this is when you're up against kind of the property, what you're seeing there on the across the property and what's next to it. This is looking southeast to south towards that second access. The second access is proposed on the other side of the dog park, just past the sidewalk. That southern access potentially could be moved further down. I talked to the applicant about that because there's, some question or concern about really, is that an ideal place given the fact that that's right next to where the little park area is. And they had indicated there was some flexibility with that if it needed to be moved. And this is looking northwest back towards that direction. You kind of get an idea from that direction what it looks like. This is looking east directly towards that connector point. And this is looking in the very back corner from east to southeast. You can kind of see the roof lines in the back there on the right-hand side of some of the homes there in that R1 area. And it's what you see there to the left and what you saw on the previous slide is pretty much what that back portion of their property looks like. And I believe the applicant's intent is to leave a lot of that undisturbed, but I'll let the applicant's representative confirm that. In terms of recommendations, if the project would move forward with a favorable recommendation, staff comments included that the applicant would need to address concerns of other departments and agencies. The big one probably being ODOT, and the other one being if they would do something different with the detention, perhaps try to move it to the rear, because we talked to the applicant as an option to do that, and maybe see if the front part of the property could be used for commercial purposes, which is really what the area is zoned, and that's really what people expect to see along 125. Don't know if that's possible, but that would be the other thing we'd be looking for is whether that's feasible. Applicants should explore the feasibility of creating a cross-access easement and collective joint parking easements for the adjoining property to the west in case they are split up and under different ownership. Applicant would ultimately need to provide additional details for the proposed landscaping plan, including additional plantings, especially if the berm and the detention pond would stay in the front, and then strategically in some other areas where there may be some visible parking or dumpsters or something like that. Sidewalk would need to be shown along 125. Applicant would need to revise proposed building architecturals and proposed building materials. Traditional building materials such as brick, stone, and other architectural enhancements would need to be consistent with the overlay area. And that can include a veneer, but it does not allow for like stucco and some other surfaces. And so I sent this information to the applicant and referenced the traditional high-quality building material definition in the code and said, basically you're kind of obligated to put in a structure that has half of that material on your building, and the applicant indicated that would not be a problem, but they didn't have time to revise the plans to show what that would look like. I think ideally we'd probably be looking for something like brick to match kind of what's already there. Wouldn't necessarily have to be, but that would be very complementary to what's there. If they have any signage, we would have to have a plan for that. I'm not really sure that that's going to be something they're going to propose. We would need an updated lighting or photometric plan, very minor area that would need to be adjusted, and then we need the lighting details themselves to show what the fixtures would look like. The applicant would have to do a new survey and legal description to consolidate the acreages. And then we have some other items that we noted from the site plan that would need to be addressed per section 1131. Some of them are pretty minor. All the big ones we've noted. And that concludes the staff report, other than I was going to note we did receive one email comment that I forwarded to you today. We received one phone call, and the person that made the phone call that I spoke with that I know of is here, and it has material to go over with you. And I believe that is everything I was going to go over. You have any questions for me?
Any questions at this time? Thank you, Mr. McCormick.
I'm going to move to this chair here in a moment because I know one of the speakers has a few slides of his own he wants to show. And I'll just leave this up in the meantime on that right there, if that's okay, with the plan.
That should be fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So at this time, is the applicant or their representative prepared to speak? Yes, please.
Okay, so my name is Troy Messer. I'm kind of the site civil engineer representative as an agent to the applicant here. And, Mark pretty much explained a lot of it that's on there. A couple things I just wanted to kind of clarify. As far as the detention basin, I'm going to approach this so I can kind of point it out here. There's a ridge, natural ridge in the property, kind of high points about right here where we have the parking lot. And it drops a solid 10 feet or so up this way. It also tilts and falls to this way to this south. So the reason, kind of the shape of what we're doing here is, the gist is not to put any impervious type surface back here. And this passive park mulch would be something that, I'm sure that what they would do is maybe we go out and kind of stake roughly where we'd like to see it, but then go out there and just make sure it's not gonna hit any big trees, and we just kind of meander it as needed to just kind of miss things and get back. It's a place for folks that they can come out and take a walk with their dog or there. So the detention really kind of needs to be up on the north side, because that's just the engineering standard practice is to not change watersheds and take water that's naturally flowing to the north and take it somewhere different. So it has to kind of be up in the front. As far as the shape, I hear that, maybe there's an opportunity to want to try to still do some commercial up front. And this is just a graphical representation of where this basin would go. It's gonna come down to the actual Clermont County critical year type storm sizing, so we can figure out how much volume you need. And then that also gets hindered by how low is our connecting storm sewer, because we can only go so deep for this storage. So, I will definitely keep that in mind as we work the shape in there, and maybe it can become a little wider and a little shorter and away from the state route to kind of get that fit in. I know there was a comment on the landscape plans, and I guess we'll work that out with staff. But I think one of the comments was, there needs to be more clarity on the thing. But I think the landscape plan had off to the left, had a tabular kind of a representation of what the codes of the different trees and shapes were. And so I just want to make sure that that's not missed, by folks on the design, or we'll want maybe some little more clarification of what they'll be looking for on that. Because I believe on both the east and west edges, we're proposing evergreen type shrubs. And on the inside of the parking lots would be more deciduous type plants. And we did see the comment about a berm on the north side of the basin, and then planting that with evergreens type layout as well. So we can obviously provide that in there. Otherwise, I think most of ODOT, the access, we had a meeting with ODOT maybe about 3 weeks or so ago, and they also were not fans of having an additional access to this parcel onto 125. So they said they'd like to still see it back on the existing apartments, the 144 units that are over here and out there. So we did a study, did the traffic takes out in the field to know what the traffic is. We've put that together, and our recommendation right now is that they'll need a drop right-hand turn lane that's eastbound on State Route 125. So that was our recommendation from our study. That, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, got submitted to ODOT for their final review, just to see if they're in agreement with what our traffic study kind of showed. So other than that, I think there was a lot of agreement on all of the comments that were kind of given by staff, and my client is in agreement to make those adjustments as needed. So again, I'll be here for any other questions as we move forward tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Messer. Does anyone have any questions at this point for the applicant? We will get to a portion where you can speak if you'd like, and then we can.
No, I have questions.
What is your
You
question,
asked
sir?
If I had any questions?
I was talking to the commission, but
Okay.
we will get to public comment in a moment. Is anyone else here wishing to speak for the applicant? Okay, hearing none, then we will open the floor to those who would like to speak, ask questions, or speak against the proposal. For anyone who wishes to do so, if you could please bring up the testimony sheet and then speak at the podium. Thank you, sir.
show up sometime, so. Anyway, the question, is that a retention or detention?
Detention.
Detention? And is the,
Can you come
Sir,
here
if you
so
could
we-
speak, there's a microphone at the podium
People
for
that
the
are
record.
watching online can hear.
is the right in, right out gonna be east or west of the detention, retention?
So, there is no right in and right out access from this development being proposed at these parcels. The actual access will be on the current Renew site
Okay,
over there, and it still will act as a full access point. Although the study with the amount of cars that are coming is to say, hey, the eastbound or the road heading to the right up there, prior to getting to this site, will need a drop right-hand turn, so they'll widen the pavement. If, you know, if they approve it, we would widen the pavement a lane to just allow the traffic to get off the main road and then safely move into the Renew.
that'd be good. Do you have those pictures?
Your slides?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And let the record reflect, it's Mr. John A. Troutman speaking
Right.
at the podium.
My wife and I own the property, adjacent to the property to the west. It's a 1 acre, a little more than 1 acre property. It's an office park. And I just want to point out a few things that concern me. If you want to,
Next one.
this is the building that is to the exact east of our property. This is our property line right here. And I have a tenant that lives, it's right here. That's what she sees outside of the window. That piece of, well, it's really a bad building. It's rat infested, there's garbage in it, it needs to come down soon. And I've talked to the applicant about it, and, you know, it's been a pleasant conversation, no hostility, but he said he doesn't have a budget to knock that building down. And that concerns me, because he said that, you know, maybe the next guy that buys the property will knock it down. So I just want to put that bug in your ear. You can go ahead and that's another view of it from the road, by the road, and keep going, and, you know, these are trees that have fallen down. And again, this is my property, these are all fallen down shrubs. This again is the view of the building. It's, you know, it's in deplorable shape. You know, it should have been knocked down a long time ago, really.
I have a question. So is this building on one of the parcels being proposed
Yeah.
in the development? And you're not planning to take this building down?
What I understand is that we are going to be taking that down. There's just no commitment to the date, like, I know you said, hey, soon. I don't guess they don't want to make a commitment as to, we'll have it down in January, but, they agreed that they would take that down, so.
I'd like to get a commitment on that. You know, he said it might be a year, might be a year and a half. We don't have it in the budget, so, you know, we don't know if we can approve it. You know, that building's got to come down soon. Not only that, it is right on the road. I mean, it's right on 125. If you look at the picture that Mark showed earlier, you could see it probably obstructs views of people trying to ingress and egress out of their own apartment project. So that's an issue. But anyway, that's one of my biggest issues. And then I guess we can move on. This gem here is a 45 by 9 foot ship container that sits at the rear of our property. It's 9 feet wide, 45 feet long, and about 12 feet high. Now, I don't know if, I can't find a zoning permit for it. I'm just throwing this in there, you know, just adding it to the complaint, but, you know, if you want to turn it, another one, that's the view out my office window, is that container. Now, I don't know how many people would like to have that behemoth monstrosity in their backyard, but, you know,
Sorry, I have a question. Whose property is that on?
that's on their property.
What's the
Mr. Messer?
Mr. Messer, what's the plan for that container?
I guess at this point, I'm not aware of that. Does that actually fall on the current Renew
Yes.
site and not on the two parcels we're talking about?
Well, it's on the current Renew property.
Yeah, so I don't know what the plan there from the owner is. I don't even know what it's there or what it's for. So,
All right, thank you.
yeah.
It's been there for about 5 years, and, you know, I just think that, you know, if there was a permit, I don't know who would have issued it, and I don't think there is a permit. I don't think anybody in their right mind would issue that, but it's been there for a long time, and I'm just complaining. So, you know, I hope you appreciate the complaint. Okay, the next one is, now this is part of the proposal that Mr. Messer made. This line right here, you can see it, this is their surveyor that put that pin there. This from, over here is their property, over here is our property. Their driveway encroaches on our land. Now, I don't know how that affects the right in or the right out. I don't know how that affects the fire department, but, you know, I've talked to the owner again about this, and he's been very polite. I said, you know, you really need to take care of this, and maybe it's not in his budget or whatever, I don't know. I'm sure I could make a deal with him if he would just talk to me, but he really hasn't really addressed the problem. But it's gonna be a problem for this plan, I think, if that driveway curb goes away. So, that's the extent of my complaints. I just think that it's up to you guys to come to some sort of conclusion about how this affects the neighbor, the person that's right next to him. And, you know, we own property around Clermont County, and we make it a point to keep our lots clean and, you know, good neighbors, and that's the way we work in Union Township. It's to everybody's benefit. So that's where I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Messer, if you'd
Yeah,
like.
just probably speak a little bit to this
Yes.
point. I'm not aware about that actual mark or if our surveyor is actually in the field, but we have completed now the boundary and topo out here. And it appears, based on the lines that I'm looking at, I can't show it to everybody right here, but it appears that, you know, the ODOT's right-of-way for State Route 125 looks like it widens or comes into this picture a little more. And I'm looking at the property line, and yeah, it looks like at some point it does start to get in onto the asphalt there. It appears, what I'm looking at, that it's within that ODOT right-of-way. And of course, we would have to work out anything that needs to be adjusted with ODOT, you know, with the traffic study and those kind of things. But, you know, it looks to me like it might, and it's pretty close, right at the right-of-way line where the right-of-way comes out to where it crosses the asphalt and starts going into the grass, let's say. So, but we'll be looking at that to see what ODOT would, you know, require us to have for access. And if it's something, I would think if it's something that has, that it's not needed, I assume as part of the improvement, that could be addressed and fixed. But it appears like it's in the public right of way at some point, pretty close maybe where that yellow line is, you see, so.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak against the? Yes, please. Yes, please. If you could introduce yourself at the podium. Thank you.
My name's Meredith Hubbard, and I'm also a neighbor to this property. I live in the subdivision that would be behind this development, actually behind all of these new multi-unit buildings that have been put up over the past few years. Our access is by a right-of-way right behind these multi-unit structures. So it's a gravel drive. I walk our neighborhood a lot. I've had dogs that were unleashed come out of those units at me. So, I have some concerns of having more people. We've had people who wander onto our property from all those units. So I'm not sure if I can exact that. That would be us, right? Yeah, this is my two neighbors, and we're back here. So this is where I'm talking about coming down, where Stanlin turns into a private drive and accesses these three homes back there. We also have a lot of water issues back there when it rains like it has been the last few days, flooding. So I'm a little concerned that this could add to that. I'm concerned with the people wandering onto our property and into our street. And also the dogs, like I mentioned a moment ago. The storm drains on 125, when it rains like it has today, you're gonna see flooding into 125 in the right-hand lane. They're not equipped to handle the water already. There's ponding, and so if you're not going very slow, that, of course, is a danger. The traffic on 125, even on a dry day, you can hardly get out of our subdivision and turn left. So now we're gonna have a flood of more cars coming out at the same point. And there's hardly any lights. I mean, there's a light up above this proposed business, and then there's one all the way down by Glen Estee, Withamsville. So there's little stop to the traffic to allow people to get in and out.
So, excuse me, so for you to exit, for you to leave your house, you have to go through the same exit that all of the multifamily?
No, ours is probably the next drive or so down, but we're right there too. Coming out into the same, coming out into that same turning lane where you sit until you can get out onto 125. Pretty scary, and people fly. It's already, 125 is a disaster already. I think we have to be careful with that. Also, I'm very concerned with, my property butts up against WT Community Park, which is no longer a community park. Somehow, that has gotten to the hands of private property. There's no trespassing signs. We've always used that park, and it was supposed to be handed down through the generations to the community, people and kids, to use as a park. So I have a question about that. What can you guys tell me is going on back there? Are we gonna be in for more multi-unit apartments back there right behind my house? Because I'd like to know. It might affect what we decide to do.
Well, no plan has reached the commission's desk. I can't say if any applicants or if anyone's in the process with the zoning department.
Okay.
But we haven't seen it. Yeah, Mr. McCormick is nodding to indicate negative on
Okay.
that.
Do you know how it got transferred out of community? Like, that's community park. It
No,
has
but-
been its whole,
To the best of my knowledge, that's never been an operated township park, so
it's not yeah,
I
it's
do
not.
not know.
It's considered a community, WT Community Park. I would think that we should be concerned about it. It's the only green space left in that area. I mean, we have some community parks over this way. You've got Shore and Klepper and, Veterans Park. But on our side of Union Township, there are no parks. There's no green space. And I just want to bring that to your attention because we need to protect that. Once that's developed, you can't go back. And we've got to be thinking along, for the future generations too. So anyway, that's all I have. Any questions for me?
Any discussion?
Thank you.
No,
And is there a way to find out about the community park?
Yeah, Mr. McCormick, if you.
Yes, please, thank you.
So, I became familiar with that site probably my second month working for the township, a little over 2 years ago. At that time, it looked like it was not really being maintained anymore. Maybe hadn't been maintained recently. Didn't look like it had been a long time on some of the fields. When I looked up the ownership here a minute ago, it still said Withensville Tabasco Community Park and PG Inc. And I think that it's been under this a similar ownership. I didn't pull up to see if it's transferred, but I think it still is kind of a communal ownership group. I have not heard of anybody purchasing it. I've not heard of anybody trying to develop plans for it. I mean, it is true to the north, there's been some development. You can see just north of that site, there are apartments that were put in not terribly long ago. Not far from the site that I had another project, and then these are relatively new here, also to the northeast. But nothing, not had anything, no discussions about that parcel at all. Not even heard of anything on that parcel. I know we've talked about it internally, cause we were, you know, it's a pretty good sized parcel, and we thought, you know, it's kind of a shame if it's not being used for anything, you know, like either we need to get it where somebody is gonna maintain it and use it, or, you know, I mean, the state that it's in, if it's not being maintained as a park and playground, like, it's not functioning the way it was designed to function, so.
Well, there's a risk of an attractive nuisance there.
Yeah, when I went out there, other than the stuff that's out there, there were some vehicles, like, looked like maybe some contractor vehicles or something parked out there. There might have been someone there, but it wasn't like a contractor moved in or something like that. But I have not been out there. I haven't been out there in a while. But to my knowledge, it's still being held by the group that's held it. And I think it's kind of a similar scenario to the ballpark that's up on Teal Town, where they still own it, but they are actively still kind of managing it. These couple ballpark areas that we have, they've had a rough go, you know, the last several years, and I heard this one's particularly had it harder. But I don't know that they're getting taxed on it at all. So if they're not getting taxed on it at all, then. So if they don't, so if it's tax exempt, then they can hold on to it unless it becomes like a nuisance. If we declare it a nuisance or whatever, we can go after them for maintenance or whatever. We've not reached that point. Honestly, I don't even know who the contact would be for that. We would probably just have to blind email or mail a letter to them if we didn't know somebody who knew, you know, like who that group was.
There should be a designated agent for service.
Yeah, I know the one for the
Secretary's
other park, like, we actually had their information, because even for the cell tower case that came in, like, but nobody can get a hold of that guy. So, you know, first of all, you gotta get a person, and then you gotta be able to get a hold of them. You know, I think it's something we would like to have an answer on ourselves, so that we would know what's going on.
Walk back to the concession stand where, on the football field. They're deer hunting out of the second floor of the concession stand. Is that legal?
Into our backyard.
Wow,
Points into our backyard.
I had not heard that.
Oh, it's ridiculous. There's a deer feeder on the 30-yard line.
They bow hunt, and they came onto our property to collect their deer.
Huh.
So they're bow hunting?
Yeah, they were bow hunting, their deer came onto our property.
Yeah, I was careful to make sure they weren't out there during gun season.
Wow.
All season and
I mean, that's not directly related to the issue tonight, but it is something we can work on trying to figure out, because it is, we are aware that it's been there. We are aware that it looks like it's not being used, and the township takes an interest in property that's not being maintained for the purposes of not having a nuisance, for one, and then we also take an interest in property where we may want to do something, whether it be for a park or whether it be for some type of development that might include a park.
It's one of the last places left in the area to have a park or any kind of green space. If you let it get away, what's left?
Yeah.
So, Mr. McCormick, I do agree, we're tending slightly off of the subject for this evening's meeting. But that is, this certainly sounds like an issue that should be discussed internally and that zoning staff should take seriously.
Sure.
Regarding everything that's purported to be going on there. So we thank you for bringing it to everyone's attention. Thank you.
And whenever the public comments are over, I can try to address a couple of the other things that have come up, but I think the public comments should continue until it's finished.
I would agree with that, thank you. Yes, please.
I'll be brief.
Thank you.
Katie Berger, and,
If you could do that when you're right in front of the mic, please, just so we get it for the record.
Katie Berger. My mother owns the house in the middle of the 3 houses on the private drive coming down. And what I would like is a commitment that that retention pond is not on the south side. I think that would be, I don't want that, our area to become like that apartment complex on 125 with the lake in front of it and everybody fishing out of the pond. So I would like a commitment that that retention or detention pond is not there. And my other suggestion, I mean, of course, we're not thrilled about having more apartments, but the walking path, I know it's a nice idea, but I would like a boundary set up. I don't know if it's arborvitae, but a clear boundary to try to keep these people from coming down on the private drive there, on the rocky road there, and out of the neighborhood, that they're not, you know. Right now, there really isn't. On the south side, there's probably, 15 feet of honeysuckle that separates the apartments from the private drive, and, that we cut back. But that will be like smack up next to somebody's house, our neighbor to the right. And with the walking path, that's encouraging people to come over there. I think that would be fair to ask for a nice looking fence, not the chain link fence that you guys have in that area right now, but, or really tall arborvitae or something to try to keep people on their side of the property. And we've had trouble with the park too. People come and dump, contractors dump stuff all on our. There's contractors using it. Yeah, it's a dumping spot. Thank you.
Well, thank you for bringing it to the township's attention. I wish we had a second case number tonight. That sounds like something that should be looked into. Horrible. Okay, any other public comment this evening? Okay, at this point, we will close the public contribution to the meeting. Everyone's welcome to stay to hear our discussion, and if you're here, we reserve the right to ask any questions. We can still continue to question the applicant as needed, but we no longer hear public comment unless we're directly soliciting it. So let's open this up and start a conversation. There's a lot going on here. Anyone would like to start?
Did you want me to go over a couple of these items?
Yes, please,
brought
Mr.
up?
McCormick. Thank you for reminding me.
So, I think it is, first of all, for the project to move forward, they're gonna have to demolish the structure up front. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, and if they don't demolish the structure out front, they run the risk of having it be declared a nuisance now that we're aware of it. When I went out there, I thought that the cleared area was the structure that was on the front of their property, and I got them flipped. So that's why I took the picture where I did.
Yeah.
But yes, if the structure's in poor condition, I mean, if they move forward with the project, they have to take it down, and we would wanna make sure that the time frame to take it down is a reasonable, quick time frame instead of something like, oh, maybe next year, because otherwise we would potentially declare it a nuisance and they would have no choice, and we would take it down at their expense. So it's not really like we can take a year to do this type of thing. It has to be done even if the project doesn't move forward, because now we're aware of it. I did talk a little bit with not Mr. Messer, but the other gentleman that I was talking with, Dugan, and he indicated that he didn't think it'd be a problem. He just didn't give me a firm commitment at the time. I think it was more of a, we just need to assess how long it's gonna take to get somebody out there type of thing, not like it might be a year or 6 months or something. It was more like we need to talk to somebody, get the estimates, whatever, to move forward on it. That's how I gathered things were when I talked to him. As far as the illegal structures or buildings, I did note that when I went out there, the issues are not on the property that the request involves, so it doesn't directly affect the request tonight. However, we're not gonna ignore, the intent was not to ignore those things anyway, so I already was gonna check into the shipping container. There's actually another structure that he didn't even bring up that I noted. And then also, to go out and check one of the trash areas to make sure it's not as bad as what I saw every time they're setting out trash, cause it can be a problem for apartment places if they're not managing
It was bad today.
regularly. And part of that is just because people like to dump stuff out there.
Right.
I mean, it can be a problem. I've dealt with this kind of issue before. So I noted 3 other issues when I went out there, but these were all on the adjacent property.
Right.
So we will
Deal
look
with
into
that
those and deal with
yeah.
those, but it doesn't really pertain to this case and this recommendation. It's just related in the sense that we have the same owner, but we can't necessarily say, well, this is a problem, so we can't do anything with this other property. On the stormwater design, they still have to do all that through the county. And the other thing to consider, there are a lot of stormwater problems in the community. And a big reason why there are a lot of stormwater problems in the community is in years past, for older developments, they didn't do stormwater management. So what is traditionally built now in the more modern time period, they have to control the development of the property has to be such that it does not increase the volume and velocity of the water as it leaves the property today. And if there's a problem, they have to fix it if it emanates from that property. Now, if the problem is the result of a problem that spans 5 properties, they can only fix what's on the one property, right? So when they develop things now, they have to detain the water or retain the water and release it in a way that it's gonna be, as if it's not developed, or better if it's a problem, if that makes sense. So again, it's all about keeping the volume and velocity equal to or less than what it is now. Whereas the old sites, they didn't do any of that. And when you look at some of these older areas, you can't see a single basin anywhere, and that's why there are problems primarily, is because they didn't do any of that. The other part of the problem is sometimes these structures that are in place are older, they get clogged, and then that's another part of the problem. So if the project moves forward, chances are the water issue, if it's designed and built properly, is gonna be better than what's there now, even though there would be development, because they have to detain that water, via detention basin, or retain it if they do retention, but they're talking about detention, which means it would just be there for a limited period of time, and then it would drain out, and then it would be dry. As far as the 125 issues, that is a long fix, because it's going to take ODOT commitment and township commitment and other townships, including those around us, to really address that problem. It's not a quick fix. I had a similar problem in my last job on US 50, and it's a multi-jurisdictional effort. The problem is there's too many curb cuts, there's too many points of conflict for places for people to stop. And just like last night when I was rerouted to 125, even though it's not anywhere normal in my normal travel pattern, eventually I got close to the 275 interchange, and somebody got impatient, and they got an accident, and they closed off 125 near 9 Mile because someone had another accident. So it's a long-term fix. The best thing is to try to limit access and to put access in places where it's not gonna create a problem. So the bigger question is, does ODOT view that access point as it exists to be a safe access point? If they need improvements, what improvements do they need? And then they have to put in whatever's satisfactory to ODOT, which in reality is probably gonna be just as bad or worse than anything we could think of anyways, as far as the township. rear property line, I had not talked to the applicant about the rear property line plantings and fence. I actually just kind of found out about that as a potential issue today. You know, it's something that we could take a look at. I don't really know without talking to them, and that's the reason why I mentioned that we need to do more of a detailed landscaping plan to make sure whether their intention was to disturb some of that area where that passive area is or not. I think he mentioned it was gonna be kind of targeted selection of knocking things out. So what is along that back property line? Is it good vegetation or not? If it's not, maybe they have to introduce some plantings, maybe they do a fence, you know. But that was the first time that became an issue brought to my attention today, so I don't know that we would necessarily say they need to put in a fence for that, because I mean, at the end of the day, they're already doing something a lot of people wouldn't do, which is put a huge buffer between the project area and the neighbors to the south. And whether that trail would be there or not, the alternative would be they would have potentially like a parking lot closer to them or a building closer to them and have the same issue to deal with, and on top of that, the light trespass and everything else. So we can, if the project moves forward, we could certainly try to address it. I just don't know that we could flat out require it. I'll be kind of curious to see if, regardless of the recommendation, what the trustees would have to say about such a thing. It's kind of an unusual situation. That's really all I had.
Do you have the density numbers for this development and the adjacent development?
This site is 4 point, I think I have it on here, hold on. Or was it 18 something an acre? That's what it was, right? 72
About
divided by
18 on this one is a rough calculation.
18.1 something.
What about the adjacent?
I don't know how big that property is, otherwise I could do the math. I think it's 9 something, hold on. I can't tell, I think it's, I want to say it's like 9.69. And if that's what it is, it would be 14.86 units an acre. Yeah, but I don't know for sure that that's the right number.
Okay.
It's in the ballpark, it's pretty
Approximately
close.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions of Mr. McCormick,
Oh, the
knowing that we always can?
the height elevation, do
Yeah.
we get a height, why is the height elevation on these proposed buildings higher than the adjacent ones, when the adjacent ones are 3 stories as well as these being 3 stories?
I don't have an answer for that. I don't know if the applicant has an answer for that or not. I don't know what the height of those buildings are, but I don't think it's as high as the
No.
elevations we're seeing now.
It also looks like the bottom floor is subgrade on
On
the
the old
existing
buildings.
ones.
Let me go to that so I can see it again.
Whereas these are not.
Right, right.
Oh, you're talking about the picture of the other ones?
Yeah,
Right.
there you go. So that's
Yeah,
gonna
it's a
knock,
lower foot, it's a lower,
that's gonna knock 3 or
Right,
4
so
feet
that's,
off, right there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference. It's not a whole story difference.
Right.
half a floor.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So, any member of the, we discuss amongst ourselves what's going on. We've heard a lot of
I
different.
think we're packing an awful lot in there. I'm concerned about the impact on 120, the exit. We're adding at least, even if we only go with 4 trips per unit, you're looking at 300 additional vehicles going out that same exit that that the current multifamily is going out. That has me concerned, and there's no plans for a traffic light there, right? I mean,
Again, it's gonna be determined based on what ODOT requires. So if
right.
ODOT's not finding the information to be satisfactory, and if they determine, it kinda depends on the safety level of service, right? And also the accident history associated with that area. And if there's a level of danger, if there's a certain level of service that becomes unsatisfactory, they're more worried about the main road than they are about the road backing up for Old Savannah. Cause like when I got there, it was off peak in the morning. I went to go leave, and it took quite a while to hang a left. If I'd have tried to turn right, I could have gotten out of there early. But I sat there for several minutes. They're not worried about Old Savannah backing up. They're worried about what's gonna happen to the main road. So, you know, they're gonna wanna make sure that that access point is sufficient on the main road. And if it's not, and they need an improvement, they'll say, hey, we need a deceleration lane or a left turn lane or whatever. I don't think the additional 72 units by themselves would require a full-blown traffic study. I think if you added the total development, you're probably getting in the neighborhood of, if they would consider what's already there at that access point, the total number might be enough to make them wanna do it. A lot of times the rule of thumb that I've seen in the past is around 1,000. I don't know if that's what ODOT's using or not, but if you
1,000
generate
trips.
1,000 trips per, a development a day, then they start looking at a more significant traffic study. But I don't know if they're gonna make them look at that existing number or not. They should in totality, but whether they would make them do a full report depends.
I would think, I mean, that's what what reality is,
Right.
it's the combined. And that has me concerned. It also has me concerned, we're putting a 3-story building right next to an R1. That existing R1, it's undeveloped, but it's still an R1, and this property's an R1. And, I'm uncomfortable with that. I know it's undeveloped, and I could see something similar to what's adjacent to this development, but what's being proposed are 3 large buildings stacked together that are gonna create a very visible side footprint. And if somebody were to develop that undeveloped R1 as an R1, this would negate them developing it that way. It would have to become something else. That's my input.
Mr. McCormick, were you about to?
The other thing I was gonna kind of keep in mind, so I believe the site is in the overlay district, and I think the entire site is in the overlay district. And the only reason why I bring that up is because I think that's how they were able to develop the other portion of the property is, you know, traditionally, some of these properties, they probably would say, the density's too high or whatever. But because it's in the focus overlay district, you know, one of the things for the Ohio Pike focus area, you know, stipulates that,
It allows for higher densities.
higher densities. It doesn't enumerate the densities like some of the districts does, though. You know, some of the districts, it'll actually give you the number. It doesn't do that.
It doesn't.
But I think that's why and how the
That would make
property to
sense.
the west developed. So,
Now, was this property, this proposed, these 2 properties entirely in the Ohio Pike?
that's what it looks like.
Okay.
And that's what I was checking.
Yeah, I'd be much more comfortable if this was a 2-story proposal instead of a 3, and units down to around 15 instead of 18, but that's my position.
I mean, it's definitely a concern for it, just in terms of density, to put more in there.
I'm concerned.
Yeah. Any other discussion or points of interest?
I'm in alignment with the density concern as well. I mean, if it was accompanied with the same amount of units as the other site is adjacent, that would be better, but it sounds like we're higher.
No, it certainly does. Mr. Shannon?
I have no comment.
Mr. Wayne?
The ODOT study would be a big part of it. You know, I pulled out of there today at, I think it was over there about 11:40 when I pulled out. And, yeah, you know, I was the only one in line, and it's still, you know, I mean, I was sitting there, but it took quite a while to get out. I'm just curious how that's gonna be during, you know, like during rush hour, how bad is that gonna get? and how many more potential accidents we have. There's, the problem I see with it, you know, and people don't like traffic lights on these roads, but that controls flow. And when you have that uncontrolled flow, you never get the brakes to get out. So, the height of the building, I don't think it's gonna be, that's not really a mitigating factor to me. The size of the building overall is a little bit, and as a former firefighter, those buildings are hard to protect. So I think about things like that, but that's not, my decision's not based on that, so. The other thing, when I looked at these properties, and we've been looking at these types of properties for a while, that particular group of properties, I don't know what else you would put back there, because you can't, I don't see a way you could run an actual access road back in there to put single family along there. So you, because of the way that was all divided, you know, decades or century ago, it makes that land very difficult to utilize.
The single family would have to be accessed from the other side.
Right. Yeah, it would basically, you'd have to take the two plots they have and then the plot next to it.
Right.
To do anything if you were gonna do single family.
Correct.
And again, finding a developer to do that,
Right.
especially given
you're
the
putting-
density of everything around it.
Putting high dollar,
Right.
single-family residential
Right, when you've got
immediate
all
next
those
to
apartments around
multifamily,
it.
right?
Yeah.
So you can actually see where the overlay boundary probably is, actually, because, right? You're seeing it, where
Mhm.
the multifamily
Oh.
is, it's all right there.
Right.
That's, it ends right there on the southern line of these
And
properties.
that makes sense,
I'd say that's how those have all developed the way they have.
for sure.
I don't know what they were thinking when they split them up that way, though.
Those old farm families.
Wasn't us.
Well, if you reduce it, if you approve it with the stipulation that it is two-story buildings max, then that takes the density down to 14 or 12. And the lower profile buildings, I know that's not a concern to everybody, but it does reduce the density. And I think it can be multifamily. I just think it's, we're trying to put too much in there. You know, without a proposal to do a single family, then multifamily, a continuation of what's there, to me makes sense, but not what's being proposed.
So let's talk along those lines, because we have to build some kind of
Right.
consensus. We're, as fun as it is watching the meeting, I think people will get bored eventually. We'll have to, I mean, do we want to hear an argument for approval with substantial modifications, or would someone like to venture arguments for not recommending denial?
I could go along with an approval recommendation, a recommendation for approval with all of the stipulations that are stated in the staff report, in addition to some of these items we've touched on. Now, I understand that we can't include that building in a shipping container, but I would require that for me to recommend approval, I would require it to be reduced to 2 stories and the density drop from 18 down to 12.
And the issue with that abandoned building is not on one of the subject parcels?
It is. On
It
the-
is.
That's what I
Oh,
thought.
it is?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why I was
Oh,
going to say,
I
we
thought you
could
said it
require
wasn't.
that.
The shipping container is not.
Oh,
But
I'm
the
sorry.
abandoned,
Then I would have to have the abandoned building
Yeah, that,
removal
right.
added as well.
yeah,
that is 909, where that building is.
that was my understanding,
Yeah, yeah.
so.
Yeah, that's what I could recommend approval for, otherwise I would not recommend approval.
What about the back end of the property? Is there any, does Does anyone have opinions or possible recommendations? I know, Mr. McCormick, you were stating that's something administratively staff can work with the applicant on,
Yeah.
the landscaping.
Of course, you know, the other thing is if the board makes a recommendation to ultimately propose that there be a reduction in density, the applicant might then in turn say we want to reconfigure the site, which could change that portion of the site.
Sure.
They could, but we would still, I mean, I would still want that reduced density. If they want to spread it out, that would be their choice.
Right. Because they might have to, I don't know, to spread it out, I don't know. It's not anything I've ever addressed with them. Or even match what's there on the other piece, which, what I say was it 14? Something, 14? If it were to match what's already out over there? On the
I'm sorry?
western piece?
Oh,
He's
the
talking about
density levels?
Uh-huh.
That's what we were talking about. If it was, oh, yeah, we were talking about being slightly reduced, but yeah, if it would match the density levels, we're still talking about though an increased flow of traffic going out that one exit. And I'm very concerned about increasing it beyond even the 12. I mean, the 12 is okay. If 14, I could go with 14 as well. I just don't think the 72 units, I think we're looking at a problem with that intersection. I mean, I think that's what's limiting it. If it had its own access point, then density isn't an issue, but for me, the density issue is directly tied to that access point.
But if they have their own access point, you're actually creating another point of conflict on
Right.
125.
I think you have to have a lighted, I mean, without having a commitment for a lighted intersection, I think adding more units in there, the more you add, the worse it gets.
But again, and I'm not defending it, I'm just saying that at the end of the day, that's gonna be ODOT's call.
Right.
And at the end of the day, if what they're proposing in terms of measures to mitigate that access point isn't enough, they're gonna say, you have to do more than put a right drop lane in. I mean, I've looked at lots of traffic studies.
But also part of what we're here to do is to be cognizant of the existing community's level of aggravation. And if doing this increases the level of aggravation that existing people in that development are going to incur. If adding these units on then makes their day that much more worse, a lot of people's day that much more worse, that's something we have to consider. That's part of our consideration, is the impact on the community, on the impact on the infrastructure, that it all plays in my opinion, it does. You know, you both talked about how long it took to get out to
Right.
make a left turn. This isn't gonna make it better. This makes it worse.
No. Although, it is the people moving into those apartments that deal with that. It's not the existing residents that deal with that.
I thought they were all going out the same.
Well, no, I'm saying going out of the apartment units.
Without the people living west of where they're all coming from.
They still can only come out at the speed they come out right now, though. That's my point.
We won't be able to go out the street because you have to have a break in traffic to get out there.
I used to,
It's gonna
Yeah.
impact our roads.
I understand, but it's the outflow that's the problem overall. There's just too much density, period, anyway, on that road. We all know that. It's been that way for decades, if not longer.
Then why add to it? You know, what is the criteria for changing a single-family residential and turn it into multi-family units? I mean, what do you base that on? Is that strictly tax money? How do you decide that?
We don't consider taxation at all.
Family. Okay, well, I don't really understand why you do that then. I think everybody agrees it's already a mess. Why add to it?
Right.
I mean, this is kind of, the point of order is, like, we're off track now, like, and not being disrespectful at all,
I
really,
understand what
but
you're saying, but
this
you don't
group,
live back
this,
there. I'm pretty sure none of you guys live back there.
what I'm trying to say
Okay.
is that if you had comments, they needed to be made during that part of the meeting. This is supposed to be an internal discussion.
Okay, well, you've just raised a different issue that wasn't brought up
Well,
at that point,
but,
so,
sir,
okay, enough.
so we've voiced many opinions on this. Traffic is routinely brought up in zoning cases where everyone who lives anywhere in the township complains about traffic, and we always cite, well, there's a traffic study that's done by the county to determine what, if anything, needs to be done when a zoning proposal is brought to us. And so typically, the county or whoever is responsible, it's usually county and usually not ODOT, but in this instance it's ODOT, makes their determination. And typically, this commission has not refused completely a zoning change based on a traffic issue.
You can't deny zoning on account, it's up to, for us to fix the traffic. You can't deny zoning because of traffic. I don't think.
Which would be my point on it.
So regardless of what you put in there, it's gonna increase traffic flow.
Yes.
Density doesn't matter at this point, because
Right.
you're gonna be adding to it.
You're adding to a problem.
I agree. I hope ODOT requires the installation of a light there to control flow. But I have no control over whether they will or will do that. Our purview is relatively small in the grand scheme of what is 125.
I mean, it's not the road problem is a long-term fix. Even if they put a light in there,
Well,
you know, the timing of the lights are an issue. They have to be coordinated, they have to be checked regularly, and if they're not, people are literally just wasting time.
Yep.
And that's what was happening yesterday. That was part of the reason why the delays were what they were. Yeah, I mean, it's an ODOT road. They're probably gonna be as difficult to deal with as anybody else would be as far as like trying to put in an access point. And I know they're aware of the issues on 125. I just don't know how they're gonna handle them, because I don't have a history in how they've handled new developments on 125.
Would anyone like to propose a motion regarding treatment of this proposal? Or I'm happy to continue further discussion, but I think we.
Yeah, I don't know where we're gonna discuss it too, though.
Right.
This is similar in several cases we've had in the past on 125. So it's,
Including one in which we were overruled.
right, which we may be overruled again. Going back to that one, basically, we followed the side of the existing residents. And I'm not opposed to doing that again. I can't take into account what the existing buildings and everything that's there really do in terms of, I wasn't happy with some of the things I saw today, was all. But that whole thing's been in transition, so.
My recommendation is to make a motion for approval with the set of recommendations from the staff and add a few things that you think are appropriate and take and take an informal query from the board.
Sure.
How many would approve that? And if you get a majority, then that's what I would go forward with.
I was unclear if a motion was coming, but if one is not, then I will prepare one.
Yeah, I don't think one's coming.
Okay. Give me a small amount of time to get this straight. Beg everyone's indulgence. This is case number 2-24-Z, applicant Daniel Lowenstein. This is a proposed motion. The zoning commission finds that the submitted PD application and zone change request is consistent with the 2030 land use, Horizon 2030 land use plan, but does not meet all of the plan development application requirements of a PD district plan. Therefore, this commission recommends the submitted plan be approved contingent upon adherence to the noted modifications as specified in this motion. All required supplemental information and plan modifications must be completed and submitted to the planning director no later than 1 week prior to the trustees' hearing of this case. We have one finding of fact. The subject property is located within the Ohio Pike corridor, which is home to a diverse mix and heavy concentration of commercial retail, commercial office, restaurant and entertainment uses, moderately dense multifamily residential development, and institutional and public uses as well, with schools, churches, and public facilities. The plan calls for land use efficiencies, access control, and aesthetic improvements and reinvestments. Modifications. This motion hereby includes the following required modifications as described on pages 5 through 6 of the Union Township zoning staff report, items numbered 1 through 10. In addition to those, numbered 11 would be the required removal of the currently abandoned building on one of the subject parcels within a reasonable time frame. And that concludes the motion. Open for discussion prior to seeking a second. Any discussion? Is there a second for the motion? There is no second. It's still open on the floor for discussion. Otherwise, I'll have to withdraw the motion. Motion is withdrawn for want of a second. Chair is opening for any other suggested motion.
You can just make a recommendation for a motion for denial.
Okay, that will be somewhat easier to do.
Yeah.
As there was no support for the prior motion, hereby move in case number 2-24-Z, applicant Daniel Lowenstein. The zoning commission finds the submitted PD application and zone change request is, I've never done one of these before, pardon me, Mr. Lewis. In order to do that, you find that it is consistent.
It's partially, it is consistent with the land use plan,
I
but it does
agree.
not meet,
Right, and then you're denying.
and I will recommend denial.
All right.
And the finding of fact is density concerns and impact on the surrounding developments.
I appreciate your assistance, thank you. So the motion is as follows in case number 2-24-Z, applicant Daniel Lowenstein. Zoning Commission finds that the submitted PD application and zone change request is consistent with the Horizon 2030 land use plan, but does not meet all of the plan development application requirements of a PD district plan. Therefore, this commission recommends the submitted plan be denied based on the following findings of fact. Again, the first finding of fact is that the subject property is located within the Ohio Pike Corridor, which is home to a diverse mix and heavy concentration of commercial real estate, commercial office, restaurant, and entertainment uses, moderately dense multifamily residential development, institutional and public uses, as well as schools, churches, and public facilities. But the plan calls for land use efficiencies, access control, and aesthetic improvement and reinvestment. Finding fact number 2 is that this commission hereby finds that the density as proposed in the current proposal is likely to have an overall negative impact on surrounding areas, and density is a concern regarding this area. That concludes the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Any second to the motion?
I'll second the motion.
I have a regularly made and seconded motion to deny the application. Any discussion? Mr. McCormick, if you'd call the roll.
Mr. Wing.
Aye.
Mr. Lewis.
Yes.
Mr. Outridge.
Aye.
Mr. Shannon.
Yet.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Is there any further business to come before the zoning commission at this meeting? I see that there's a line item for administrative.
The only thing I was gonna bring up is I had sent you guys the proposed meeting schedule. I think I had a comment or two from a board member here and there about a particular meeting, which is pretty normal. I think that's gonna happen no matter what. The main ones I was kinda concerned about were the ones that we shifted, which was July, November, December. The November, December meetings shift typically because of the holidays anyways. The one in July, we have 5 weeks, and so we could either do it the 23rd or the 30th. I was pushing it to the 30th, in part because I know my sister's getting married, and I was trying to make sure it wasn't around that time period if I could avoid it, because if we end up making it, it's out in Oregon and Washington, so we can move it. If we do, in the worst case scenario, I'll have somebody cover me if it's the same time frame.
Okay.
But that was the only other one that was kind of an odd one, as far as the actual meeting date. One of the other deadlines changed to a Monday. 2 of them changed to a Monday. But that doesn't affect really the board.
Right. Okay, and this case will be heard at the next meeting of the Union Township Trustees.
January 14th at 6 p.m. upstairs in this town hall.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Any other business? I suppose not.
Nope.
So we are, well, first of all, a motion to adjourn. Do I hear
I
one?
move that we adjourn the meeting.
I'll second.
A regularly made and seconded motion that we adjourn the meeting. Mr. McCormick?
Mr. Wing.
Yes.
Mr. Lewis.
Yes.
Mr. Outridge.
Yes.
Mr. Shannon.
Yes.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes, we are adjourned at 8:33 p.m. Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you for the gavel.